Good morning. I ask if you're a praying person that you say a prayer that I get through what I have to say about my father, who passed away on April 9th from COVID-19. About a week and a half ago, I shared a message on Facebook about what it was like to be a family who had suffered through health issues and leading up to my father's death. However, I did not explain, because we had not had a funeral yet, of what that process would be. Very trying times. I know Hopkins County, as they have stated the numbers, and every time I hear them every day as I follow along with the local officials here and Governor Andy Beshear, they're astronomical, particularly here in Hopkins County. And all I can do is sometimes drop my head and shake it, because it can simply be avoided if you practice social distancing. Would we have ever dreamed that my father would have contracted COVID-19? Absolutely not. But we realized that he had health issues and that he would have to be protected throughout the duration of this to keep him alive. So I'll start my story by really saying this. Hopkins County Schools has a motto, and it's about every child has a story if you would just read it. Well, I'd like to change that a little bit today and say that every COVID-19 death has a story if you will just listen to it. So on about February 25th, my niece, who attends Hopkins County Central High School, came home in the afternoon to find her papa lying in the floor. 911 was called, and an ambulance came. This is the third time in a week that he had to go to the ER. Upon this arrival, he was admitted to the hospital. Because, and this was not even related to COVID at the time, because of his issues, and we did not have a specialist here, he was transported to another facility where he was looked after, and we got those things under control. So at that time, once those conditions became better, we chose a facility here in town where he could rehab and get the strength he needed to come back home. Prior to that, he was like most of us, a widowed man living at home by himself. He could cook. He could watch his big TV. He watched the news daily. We wanted him to get back to his regular self. So rehabilitation was going to have to take a little bit of time. He entered the long-term care facility on March 6th. We visited with him several days, for lengthy times, would have to need some assistance because of his diabetes. He was blind. He had not driven in over a year, and my dad made his livelihood as a truck driver for over 50 years. So when you take the car keys away from somebody, it's really hard. That was his life. So for the last year, he's pretty much stayed at home, watched TV, go to church. Every time the doors was open, he was at church. So we visited with him several times in that facility. And then on a Monday, we check in. We have to sign waivers because of the COVID-19, that we did not have a temperature or anything like that, and we could go in to visit. So on Tuesday, March the 10th, same routine. I get out of school, drive to the facility, but this time our temperature's taken, and we have to sign the waivers again. Each time you entered, you have to sign the waivers, and you had to be kind of inspected to go on in. So I visited with him that day for several hours. And if you know me, my family's a big basketball fan. So it was the regional basketball tournament, Madisonville and North Hopkins playing Webster County. So my family, all of us, and my dad knew it, supported it because we love basketball. We drove to the basketball game. And simultaneously, my sister texts us and tells us we can't visit the facility anymore. It was at tip-off. I did not enjoy the basketball game because I knew that he needed help being blind, and because of his health issues, us going in to assist every day and seeing those things that he would need, we couldn't do anymore. So at that time, it felt like a death. So we continue on to try to get through it the best we can because he had gout, he had a flip phone, he couldn't dial our numbers, he couldn't see the numbers. And every once in a while he'd have to get assistance from the nurses. Or we would have to call the facility and say, look, something's wrong with Dad's phone, can you go down and check it? They were always gracious. My dad always bragged on the nurses and things that he had there at the facility, and he liked it. I was quite surprised because nobody really likes to be confined to a rest home. So things continued. Day to day, call several times a day. Try to call. Sometimes he wouldn't answer the phone. So days for my dad became long there. We were trying to get him out of the facility as quickly as possible to get him back home because that's where he wanted to be. But his health issues, he was trying to get the strength to even stand and go to the restroom, or to stand and maybe go cook an egg in the morning. But he couldn't. Also, within the facility, they had to go by procedures from the CDC, I assume, and they were confined to their room. You and I have been confined to our home, but we can walk from window to hallway to another window and look out and go outside. But my dad was kind of like in a prison. And he can't see, so he goes to the window. It wouldn't have done us any good to go to the facility and stand at the window because he wouldn't have known who we were. He would only know our voice. So about the time that we thought we could bring him home, and I had talked to the physical therapist, he started having other issues, filling with fluid because of his congestive heart failure. So see, I've already told you that he's had two symptoms, that he's a prime candidate. If he gets COVID-19, that's going to latch on to him. Diabetes, a heart condition, stage 4 kidney failure. He had a lot of it. So we monitored his health. I guess the facility may have got tired of us calling out there, but when you can't be, my mother passed away from pancreatic cancer, but we were at the hospital for every step of the way. We knew every pill my mother took. We knew every injection she had. We were there for her. But for this time, we could not be because of the guidelines. This is the hardest thing that I have gone through in my life, and I thought my mother's death was pretty bad. So, continuously on the phone, calling his doctors even to try to get them to go to the facility to maybe check on him. Because we knew something wasn't right, because my dad, he wouldn't go to a hospital unless he had to. So when we knew he would ask for something, we knew we had to get on it. But we also realized, too, if we brought him home, that maybe he would have another issue, and trying to get him to a hospital at this time with what's going on could be more dangerous because he's already been in several facilities. So We tried the best we could. We wanted our dad home. He had a meltdown one day. My father's a stern man. I've only seen him cry a few times in his life. But he would be on the phone with me, crying about what was going on with him. And it was so bad one afternoon that I called my sister to have me meet me at a midway point so we could talk about Dad and not in front of his grandchildren on what we needed to do. I think he kind of knew in retrospect of what was going on with him, and I think maybe he would have been scared to give us the virus. I don't know. I can't answer those because I never got a chance really to talk to him much more after that, because he began to still fill with fluid. But just about when we thought we were going to get him home, I'd already called the facility and asked for them to fill the paperwork out, and we were ready to bring him home. And about 5 minutes after I hung up the phone, my dad called me. And he said, "Sharon, have you called them yet to see if I can go home?" And I said, "Yes, Dad, I made the call, and you're coming home tomorrow afternoon. And they're getting all the paperwork together." And he said, "I really need to see my doctor. Something's going on." And I could tell by the way he was talking, he could hardly breathe. He has congestive heart failure. I knew he was probably filling with fluid. So I got off the phone and I said, I'll talk to you and I'll get back to you. So I hung up the phone and I called the facility. Talked to the nurse and asked her to go down and check on my dad. She did, and when she returned the call, she said, "I believe your dad needs to go to the ER." And I said, I believe that. So he goes to the ER. I've not seen my dad in 4 weeks. So I drive over to the ER, praying that I can just get a glimpse of him coming out of the ambulance. He won't be able to see me, but he could hear my voice. And that's why I'm here today, is because I need to be his voice. I need to be a voice for Hopkins County, my community, and for you to listen about the trials and tribulations that you go through with this COVID-19. There were 2 state police officers parked at the hospital. I don't know if they were there to keep people from going in or if we'd had something going on, but I just prayed, "Lord, let me get out of this car and shout to my dad so he knows I'm here." He heard my prayers, and I got out of the car. My sister insisted that I go yell at my dad, and I did. And I said, "Dad, I'm here. We are with you." And he raised his hand and recognized my voice, and they took him into the ER. So the next 48 hours was very, very hard. So they have protocol. Nobody goes in. So you have to wait until someone calls you, and the clock is just ticking. Tick, 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 tick. You're waiting on that call because you don't really have a number to call. They're going to call you. So someone calls, they get the information they need, and then they begin to assess him. So I have to wait. We as a family have to wait more time. Finally, they call, and I'm given a number, and I talk to the nurse that's tending to him in the ER. And she said he's being admitted for congestive heart failure and pneumonia. And so I began to ask questions. That's all they would say. How would you like to be in that position, trying to find out information about your father's health, and that's all they will give you? So I was told and given a number to wait a few hours till they got him up on the floor. And when they told me what floor he was on, because we'd been in the hospital enough, and when he told me room 608, I'm like, not for congestive heart failure. You're on the 3rd or 4th floor where you're being monitored. So my eyebrows began to raise like, this is something a little different, because I've been there and done that. So about midnight, the nurse calls, and she's telling me he's been, assessed for this and assessed for that, and that in the morning we would probably know more information, that the doctor, the hospitalist would make their rounds, and we would find out more. So the next morning, and mind you, we didn't get much sleep. The next morning, my sister and I, we did a conference call with the nurse and still found out very little. But the doctor had been in, and because they were seeing so many patients, and I understand that, but there's other people to attend to. But it still doesn't, in your mind, be justification, because that's your dad. That's my last living parent I have. So they said the doctor makes his rounds, he'll put in the notes, and then we'll go from there. Luckily, he took his phone with him, or we called the room. I should say he took his phone with him, but we called the room and talked to Dad. And mind you, I didn't tell you this part, but every time I would talk to him on the phone, it was hard for him to carry on a conversation because of the shortness of breath. But I found out that he had been tested for COVID, and it wasn't very pleasant. He said, I had 2 Q-tips inserted, and I'm cleaning this up. I mean, he didn't use any foul language or anything, but he said, inserted into my nostril, and it was a pain like you've never felt before. It was the size, that Q-tip was the size of a ruler. So now we wait to get the results. So when we had called, my sister and I had called on conference, they said that they would talk to the nurse and get her to call. And she was a very good nurse. And I believe her name was, and I hope I'm saying this right, Chelsea or Chesley, something like that. I'm so confused from what I've been to. So I waited for 6 hours, 3:30 in the afternoon. I had not heard from her. So I called again. And I probably got a little snippy, and I didn't mean to. I'm not that type of person, but you can imagine what we've gone through, what we've waited. You're just all over the place. So when I called to talk to the nurse again, I was informed she's busy. Well, can we take a message and she'll call you back? And I said, well, I've been waiting for 6 hours since the first phone call. I guess I can wait a little bit longer. So within 30 minutes, she called me back. And she was very apologetic because she blamed herself, but I can see she's probably busy. At that time, I don't know how many people we had in the hospital for COVID. I'm sure there's plenty. So we talked about his issues and what he had going on and what kind of medications were being used to pull the fluid off of him. And she had told me. On the second day when we talked, the first day she couldn't see his eyes because he was so full of fluid, his eyelids were even swollen. She couldn't see his blue eyes. So we hoped that this would work. And so on the second day, we were informed by the same nurse. His fluid seemed to be coming off. She could see his eyes today. And so that was a good sign for us that the fluid was leaving his body. Now, I'm not naive enough to know that maybe he did have COVID-19. But I call them light symptoms. From what you hear on the news, you hear that maybe they have a cough. He never had. A temperature. He never had. So he has shortness of breath. But that's typical of someone who is in congestive heart failure. So you're not thinking that at all. You're just worried about getting the fluid off his heart so he can breathe. So several times that we did talk to the nurse throughout the next couple of days, you know, we knew it was probably a 48-hour wait, but have you got the results back? Have you got the results back? Have you got the results back? My brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles, we gave Dad's room number and telephone number and asked them, you know, to call. They wanted to. They were worried. But we had to retract that because my dad could not talk without wearing out. He could not finish 2 or 3 sentences, and he would just be exhausted. So we asked them not to call, that I would make 2 calls a day, morning and evening, and then text message them how my dad was doing. So the nurse suggested having a Zoom teleconference. She said, "Are you familiar with Zoom?" And I laughed and I said, "Yes, I am. In the last 2 weeks, we've used that in schools. I'm not technology savvy or anything, but I am so glad that I learned one new lesson in this school year using Zoom." So we decided to have a Zoom conference on Thursday, April the 9th, and we set it up for 5:45. And my 2 nieces, and my sister, we were all gathered, socially distancing, on my dad's front porch. So my niece also has Zoom because she's had several telephone conferences with her teachers. So we set it up. And so there he pops up on the screen. The first time we've really seen him in over 4 weeks. He looked good. He didn't look sick. We could tell he was swollen somewhat, but he looked like Dad. We had a short telephone conference because, again, he was, exhausted with breath. I know my nieces, they were glad to see him because they live next door to him. They saw him every day. And now you can't see somebody, and it had been over 4 weeks since they had got to visit at the rest home. So we had our conference and, made small talk. "Dad, have you been eating?" And this is where I got worried. This is where I really got worried. Because he had said something the day before to me. But, I just was worried about other things. I haven't felt like eating, but they let me pick my own meal tonight, and I chose to have a grilled cheese. He said, "But I can't taste it." Another sign. I became really worried at that time because he indicated the night before. One of the questions I asked him is, "Dad, can you smell?" "No, I can't smell. Got this oxygen in my nose. I can't smell." Okay. So the last thing I said to his nurse is, "If you happen to get those test results back tonight, will you call me before you get off shift?" And she said, "Absolutely, I will." So we ended the conference. We were all pretty jovial. He looked good for our father. I know my nieces were blessed to get to talk to him. My nephew didn't get to join in. He was working. My other niece lives in California, and she was also working. So I had prepared supper that night for everybody. And so, again, social distancing. I set the food out on the table that we have on the front porch and said, I've got my portion out, so you take yours home, then you eat it. So because as a family, we could not sit down. I failed to tell you that when this all started, when school was out on March 15th, and I left school, knowing that my dad at any time could come home, my 3 sisters and I had conferenced about, Dad's going to need assistance, so what are we going to do? And it was decided that I would self-isolate. I made a sacrifice. There are a lot of you here in Hopkins County that may have made or are still making sacrifices to stay home. I'm a history teacher. I know all about the Spanish flu from 1918. I know practices that had to be done. I know their numbers spiked when the war was over and people spilled into the streets and they had a parade. And it got worse. So we knew that there would be some sacrifice. I isolated. This is the second time since school has let out that I've been out in public. The first time was for my father's funeral. Because when you love somebody, you make those sacrifices. My middle sister, Lori, said, I'll be the one to gather the groceries and to go to the pharmacy and do the things we need to do. And she and my nieces sanitized my father's home from head to toe to prepare for him coming home. She drives a bus for Hopkins County. And many a time when he was still in the hospital and when he was in Nashville, she would run her route and then leave and go be with my father so he would not be by himself. He was there when the tornado hit, by himself. They called a code orange. They took him out in the hall. He was on the top floor of the hospital. My sister, who is in Brenton, Missouri, called us early in the wee hours of the morning and said, turn the TV on, there's been a tornado in Nashville. We didn't know where at the time, but we were concerned. So these are just some of the things that's happened along the way. So we as a family got a game plan. See, I'm a former coach, and I'm a teacher. And you always have a plan A, a plan B, and in the back of your mind, you've got C, D, and E going on as well. So we planned, and we were looking forward to the day. I know there's other families out there. I think we now have 16 deaths. My dad was number 7 in Hopkins County, and number 90 when his name was read by Governor Andy Beshear. So back to the video conference call. We get off the phone. We've had dinner. I've had dinner by myself in my father's home, and my sister and my nieces have gone up to their home to have dinner. I had to go back and look when the telephone came in, but it was at 7:39 I got a call, and it was my dad's nurse. And I could tell she was a little upset. Then I could tell she was distraught. And I really honestly thought she was going to tell me he tested positive for COVID-19. It was that he coded and he didn't make it. I'm there by myself. No one to console me, nothing. And I fall on the floor. And all I could think about was thanking her for the Zoom conference call that we got to see him one last time. Now I have to gather myself up, and I have to go tell my family. Not taking away anything from my mother's death, that was hard. But we were there in the room, holding her hand, and knew when she passed. We never got that option. It was very hard sometimes for my dad to tell us that he loved us. He was just a kind of a stern man. We were not huggers. Now you can't hug. What I'd wish to get a hug. So I go, and it wasn't very pleasant. I'm sure my dad lives in a rural area and out in the country, and I'm sure the neighborhood probably heard us with our commotions and our outcries when I had to tell my sister, who's in Springfield, Missouri, on speakerphone, and my sister and other two nieces who come running down to the porch for me to tell them that my dad is no longer with us. So you can imagine all the things that happened between then and then the next day. I call the 6th floor to get my dad's belongings, and all he probably had with him was his cell phone and the pajamas that he was in coming from the long-term care facility. But to see about gathering those up, and also to see if the results had come in. So I talked to the charge nurse. And, I think she was trying to find the means to tell us that he had it. And so she was trying to fumble through her notes or through her computer to look it up. She knew what she was going to have to tell me, but I think she had to find that courage to tell me. And she said, yes, I have to inform you that he did test positive. So from 6 o'clock to 7:39 on April the 9th, when we got off the phone, I thought I would be talking to my dad the next day, but that did not happen. He did not know he died from COVID-19, but I'm sure he was suspicious, and in retrospect, we think so too. Then I asked the nurse one last thing, the charge nurse. I said, were you there when my father coded? And she said, yes, I was. And I said, could you walk me through those last steps so maybe we could have peace of mind? I'm not going to share that with you. But I do know that all the nurses that were on that floor, when they coded, and whoever they called, because I've been in a coding situation with my mother, and 20 people show up, and that includes the chaplain, that they were geared in their PPE to try to do what they needed to do for my father. So now we have to plan a funeral. And it's nothing you want to go through, because a lot of the planning's already done for you, because you have to go by the CDC guidelines. You all have heard stories, or you know of people who have passed, and you've probably shook your head and said, I feel for that family. I then put a post on Facebook talking about those days that led up from the long-term care facility until the death of my father, about what he had to endure. The funeral was not on there, but in retrospect, it was the hardest thing that I've had to do. He was buried at Pleasant Hill Cemetery in Nortonville, Kentucky. up on a nice hill. We had a drive-through service. My mom and dad's plot right next to the road. I guess the Lord plans in mysterious ways. But my sisters wanted to have a drive-through. You all have read obituaries out here in the paper. What they don't tell you is that you cannot put a time of when this is going to occur, particularly the drive-through, because that is called the calling and inviting masses to show up. So most of the obituaries read, the family will have a graveside service. You're only allowed 10 family members. And you still have to social distance. You cannot hug. You cannot console. Your emotions are bottled up in you, other than crying. A drive-by service is not what I wanted, but it's all we had. It started out cloudy on April 13th. And then all of a sudden, the sun opened up. And I think my Uncle Chico said it well. We ended up under the circumstances, we ended up having a nice ceremony to put my father to rest. A lot of people who probably need to hear this message doesn't watch social media. I'm asking you, if this has made an impression on you, that maybe you share this with other people in our community, and that maybe they would share this message to get people to understand it's not something you want to go through. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says there's 5 stages in death. And I used to teach my psychology students the acronym DABDA, D-A-B-D-A. Death, anger, bargaining, denial, and acceptance. I'm in the anger stage. And I am angered every time that I read or hear. I don't see, because I've self-isolated and made the sacrifice that I need to for my community. But I am angered at the Hopkins Countyans who are flippant about not doing what has been asked. Not doing what has been asked. On that Facebook page that I made, I never would have dreamed that there would be 280 shares, 405 comments. That is not what I set out to do. I just wanted to be a voice in my community to let people know that this is what you're facing. And that was only a third of what we faced, is what I had in print. So Hopkins County, I'm asking you to do what is asked, to flatten this curve, because our numbers are just way out of hand. Thank you, and God bless, and remember my family in prayer.